Welcome to the Everything's Coming Up Marketing Podcast, where we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of marketing and mental health. On this show, oversharing is caring. I'm your host, Amber Rhodes. I hope you enjoy the show. Hey y'all, so welcome to Everything's Coming Up Marketing. Today I'm here with Joe Marilla, who deals with stress by...
I have two answers for this. I turned to my partner and I was like, how do I deal with stress? She's like, you don't. I was like, oh no, that's so bad. And she's kind of right in a way because I'm a like push my energy to the limit kind of person where it's like, oh, I could probably take this on and I probably don't need to talk about it with anyone. So I think like what they call that bottling it up or like pushing it down, which I don't try to do, generally speaking. That said, I've reflected on this in advance and I appreciate the question. One way I think is to try and cultivate gratitude. The word gratitude and like going back to that as a way to deal with life challenges is such a, I think it's like on one hand like super obvious and direct, and on another hand it's like nebulous, and just thinking about it doesn't always get you to that emotion in a way that like gives you relief. So a way that I guess I try to put that into practice, that sometimes you're just like sometimes you're just mad at your situation and you're like, I don't want to cultivate gratitude, like I don't have time for this crap. But anyways, like if I am trying to actually do it, it'll be like a fast forward into the future old age version where you like do a look back on what you're capable of doing right now, what kind of things that you should be grateful for because you can do them now, not because you should be grateful for them in your current present state. Because you're like, I should be grateful for all these things because that's what you should do. But to try and almost cultivate a feeling of I don't know, is it like a helplessness or a regret from being in a future state where it's like, I won't have that time back. And I find that, I guess a combination of that, like being in the present and knowing that this moment of, sadness or difficulty or complaining or whatever it might be, whether it's totally valid or not, that it's also fleeting. And I guess that's what gives beauty to it. It's really hard to like put myself there. So that's one. And then the other one is a bit of like a, hopefully not too much leaning on like the toxic hustle culture perspective of like pushing through. But one thing that I do try to cultivate is like knowing that the difficult parts of life are the growth zone. That does give me solace, and I do appreciate that because I believe it to be very true. And I think, framing the perspective of what you're going through, again, it can be hard. You can appreciate, and those feelings are valid. And when you're tired and all that stuff. But also knowing like, okay, this might be good. This might be something I overcome and then now have the experience or access to this skill of overcoming it, et cetera, et cetera. It's for sure easier said than done, but I think that's another thing that I try and hold on to, and I'm not amazing at, but try to.
Yeah, that's a really interesting call out, the growth zone, because it is really hard when you're in the moment to be grateful for the future state of you that will know how to deal with that problem. Because you're like, God, this just sucks. Like, I don't even want to deal with this right now. It's hard to be so present that you're like, this is a growth zone. Have you ever had a moment where you can differentiate between like, I know that this is a growth zone, or maybe this just sucks and I just have to accept it, and it's not a growth opportunity, but it just sucks?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I would say it almost always sucks immediately and it's never approached with wisdom immediately. It's always it always hurts. It always affects my mood. I always will probably bring it with me for a little bit. Um, you know, bless my partner's heart for, being a soundboard and things like that. Um, and I think the kind of additional perspective that I try to wear as much as possible is a long term perspective of things. That's a really hard one too, and that one's like one I picked up semi recently, and I'm kind of understanding the value of, and what I mean by that is, I guess so. Yeah, immediately it sucks, but as it continues over time, over weeks, or it like ebbs and flows in and out, like the roller coaster of our work lives usually does. Um, I'm like, okay, this has been an ongoing thing, clearly. So like it like spikes and then it simmers down, but it still sucks in that like level. You're like, why is this a thing I'm dealing with? But when I've been able to look back at it, I'm like, oh, this is like the fifth time, that whatever time that it's happening, then I'm like, okay, clearly this is a long term thing that's happening, and or it's a thing that's been ongoing. Um, and I guess what I'm trying to say is like with the long term perspective, I'm like, this is also short in the grand scheme of things. And like, whatever, like, this is a week and it does suck, but hopefully, again, that's like a bit of the gratitude, a bit of the growth. It's like, this is just like one speed bump. This is like one, when you're in traffic and traffic feels like it's infinite, even though it's literally like a couple minutes, but you're like, I feel like I've been in traffic for like 2 hours right now, but it's never that. So trying to get somewhere there on the long term, it's like, this is nothing on the, again, not trying to minimize problems, but I guess we just get there whichever way we can. And it's only through it recurring, but it's more often than not when I do run into something, it's like, this sucks right away.
Yeah, I think it's a really good perspective to think of it in the long term because do you know that joke about how like what's longer, a microwave minute or a treadmill minute? Because they
Mm,
feel so long, and then like you said, the traffic minutes where you're like, what is happening?
yeah.
Um, Having that long term point of view is really difficult. And when I hear the words gratitude as like a something that people use to relieve stress, to tap into like conversations about mental health, it's usually very in the now. They keep gratitude journals. Like those are most of the
Mhm.
conversations I've heard. So they're writing down like, I feel grateful that it was sunny, or I feel grateful that I have a supportive partner. Great things. But you're kind of taking like a really high level look at what it means to be grateful. Future Joe, past Joe, growth zone Joe.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I actually don't do the gratitude journals. Actually, to your point, as you were talking about it, I'm thinking like, I think the reason why I have to do the future Joe piece is because the gratitude has to be like juxtaposed on the bad in the same way, like same cliche of like, you can't have, you can't enjoy the sun without the rain and the darkness and the light and all that crap. But that's true. Like you do. That's just human nature to recognize like why you like something or want something, because you don't have it, and you recognize what the lacking of it makes you feel. And so I feel like to get to for me to internalize gratitude well, I need to know exactly why I should be grateful, not just that I'm grateful, but like picture why, like if I didn't have it, how much it would suck, I think. And I don't know if that's the approach that is recommended, but here we are.
There's no right or wrong. Is
Mhm.
this something that you do in your head, or are you writing it down? Or are you doing it with a therapist?
Yeah, mostly in my head, conversations with my partner. I keep a journal, but it's very like pragmatic musings of like it's sometimes it's like how I feel, but more often than not, it's like historical, um, just capturing what happened and if anything was important to me.
How very James Comey of you. That's not a very topical reference. I just realized. But yes, like it's kind of like a Ben Franklin approach to journaling.
Yeah, and that's not because I don't feel like, I definitely feel like I could like wax poetic, so to speak, about like I get deep, but I'm like, oh, I can't open that. that Pandora's box essentially, or else like, well, like my hand will be tired by the end of it. So I just try to keep the Coles notes, and in hopes that like when I look back at it, if I reread the pages, that I'm like, oh yeah, I remember how I felt, and like that hopefully will be enough, or that I'll feel, pleased with that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So even just the act of writing down the historical whatevers, if you went back and looked at it, you would know, you could be able to put yourself almost in that place and time and that feeling.
Yes, I do feel like that. It's like when you look at an old picture and you're like, I remember how I felt, but if you asked me about that moment, I might not remember. But once you see it, you know.
Yeah. So I do have a question. I'm going to shift the conversation forward a little bit and
Sure.
ask present day Joe.
Hey, how you doing?
That's so good. Yeah, it's I'm a barrel of emotions. um, I feel like right now I am really feeling a lot of them. I generally like, hover at positive, I guess. And I'm like all those ways that I said I kind of deal with stress and things like that. And because we were talking about habits earlier, I'm in this kind of level of hyper awareness, or hyper self awareness for myself, and so I think that helps to keep me grounded. The journaling is super helpful with that, just because like when I write day after day, like, oh, like I didn't do the things that I wanted to do, and like we'll work on that tomorrow, kind of thing. It helps me keep things in focus, and I think that's what's helping to keep me in this place where I feel okay, generally speaking. And then on top of that, like a lot of like happy things are happening in my life. Like I'm getting married in June, and things are going well. And then also, you know, one of the questions or thoughts here is like being a first marketer at a startup. I'm like, oh, this is like so hard, and like I feel like a lot of marketers um, like this will resonate with a lot of marketers, where like your knowledge base could be infinite, and you're like, how do I do that? Like, how do I know everything and then apply everything perfectly, and then doing all these other things on top of it? But I would say I'm doing good with like a deep breath before and after.
Yes, just a quick breathing exercise. I'm doing good. And then a
Yeah,
deep breath out.
yeah.
Um, so, okay, that was very interesting that you mentioned being a first marketer at a startup, because I can imagine that that is a very stressful situation. Um, and this kind of leads me into the question that I have about like how does mental health, like taking care of your mental health and wellness, relate to your career in marketing? And
Mm.
that's a huge question. So start where you want.
Yeah, no, it's not a small question. um, I would say it's it's been a journey, and I want to say that I've gotten better in so many ways, but feel very the same in a lot of other ways. One of the top things that everyone who watches this and pays attention to mental health will be like, oh yeah, that's on the bingo card, is like the imposter syndrome, which has been like an infinite struggle, and I feel like I've gotten better with that over time. um, just time under tension. um, when I like look back recently, I'm like, oh, I've been in marketing for a decade, and that like it feels like a short time. I felt like I just started being an imposter a while ago, like just recently. But after that, I'm like, okay, I feel like that helps, like just more time gives you something to stand on foundationally. And especially if you're dealing with imposter syndrome, more often than not, it's because you're doing something new that you know that you don't know how to do, and you got to figure that out. So there isn't really a foundation that you feel confident. You're like you're not like stepping on top of something that's already built. You're like, oh, this is a new area. um, so that's been a big thing. And then just from a career perspective to like, or just relationship with work, um, which we kind of touched on earlier, is my relationship with like money and finance, which has been an evolving thing, um, that's been toxic for sure at some point. Um, and that as I grow skills and, upgrade my salary and things like that, and learn how I don't feel like I'm completely at the mercy of business and just like floundering through it and feeling like, okay, I can navigate. I understand what my worth is, generally speaking, just based on like what people have paid me in the past. And it's really difficult still, but to look back and be like, okay, I've been able to maintain things and be stable jobs, even though it's been so long. But also that like fear of like, if it all comes crashing down, then like what will happen? Am I ready for that? And really trying to remind myself like, you'll be fine. Like it'll be fine. Like if I was your friend, I would tell you, um, that like you're smart and capable and you'll figure it out. Um, so those are things that I would say I wrestle with, a lot on the career work place.
Yeah, I kind of want to dig into both of those, but a question popped into my mind that's about the money side. You said, like, what I'm worth. And we've all had that question for ourselves, like, what am I worth? Does it ever bother you that, like, you're tying your worth to a monetary value when it comes to doing marketing work?
Yes, it definitely, like, it bothers me in that it's necessary in a way, and it bothers me in that that's the system. Like there's no, like, you don't have to and you shouldn't for mental health purposes, and simultaneously the system has assigned. Um and so yeah, it's super annoying, and I think I've wrestled with that a lot, especially coming from, we were talking about earlier, like the social good sector, where the perspectives, are much more progressive in nature, and so, um, you know, definitely, kind of minimizing people to worth in dollars, and it is like, you have an allergic reaction to that, and simultaneously I'm like, okay, for my own mental health I need to reconcile this, because I, like, it's more suffering, it's more torturous to not figure this puzzle out in my brain, if that makes sense.
It does. So, I mentioned to you, but to the listeners, I will tell you that I come from a nonprofit background. I thought I was going to change the world. And from that, I never really saw myself working in a for-profit sector. I was like, it's not for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Money is nice. It turns out it's really nice to have money. Like as soon as I got into SaaS, and I was like, you're going to pay me this to do that, um, which is maybe the same amount of work that I was doing for a nonprofit, but twice the amount of money. Like or 3 times an incredible amount of money. I've had to grapple with that question of like, do good, make no money, or do neutral, not necessarily bad, but
Right.
work for venture capitalists at the end of the day, make good money, be emotionally fulfilled, then can put more good back into the world. That was a lot about me, but do you like tell me what you come from this social good background. So like you have a similar point of view about working for profits. Like it feels a little icky.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how did you get to the point where you were able to grapple with that for your own mental health?
Yeah. um it's it's so difficult, and everything that you said, I appreciate you sharing that. It, like, I think it resonates with anyone who has either this background or just generally, like, they never went this way, into the social good, mission driven kind of space, but care about things and people, will still kind of feel the same way and recognize that. And some people just don't care at all, and it's like, All right. Well, ignorance is bliss. You must be like the happiest person out there. And so I can't even hate on that in a way because I'm like, I just wish I
Same.
was this happy.
I'm
Um,
so jealous of those
yeah.
people.
Yeah. More often than not, it's like, I wish I just didn't know, but I don't, but I do. Um, um, so on one hand, simultaneously, like I guess I'm lucky that I haven't really left a mission driven kind of sphere. My current role is at a health tech company. And what we're doing is, has positive outcomes in the world and on patients. And that's awesome. So I can kind of lean on that. And then before that, it was SaaS tech as well, but it was for, nonprofits and charities and social good. So there's still something that I would cling to. So I guess I honestly, Amber, like a lot of that, when you said like I'm going to change the world and I'm not going to leave it, I would say I'm like extremely lucky to have not fully left it, and it's kind of like a life rope raft that I'm like hanging on to, and I've toyed with it. And like when I was switching roles, like I would like before this one, I was interviewing at non mission driven roles, and I think to your point, it's like it's like night and day. And I think the way that you put it is, I don't want to say correct, but there are lots of ways to do good, to create like great good energy, to create good outcomes for the world, um, that don't require also like someone else's mission in a way too. Like it's not often your own idea, but obviously like all the nonprofits charities do something positive, generally speaking. A lot of caveats to that, but yeah, I feel like we all have to like reconcile, like, and not everyone has the luxury of like working at a nonprofit or charity, whether that's because they won't make enough money to do what they need to, or just because they don't have the skills, and like, yeah, they need to feed their family or what have you. And so um I think I come to that realization or recognition that there's more to it than just like stamping this big progressive social good label on myself, for better or for worse.
But you were able to kind of stay in that social good space. Was that an intentional choice by you?
Yeah, I think when I was like looking originally, I was like, if I had to choose and things were similar, I would 100% choose the one that leaned social good and mission driven. But I did come to terms with that, I think, and said like, if the work wasn't, then there's a couple things that need to sustain me. One, like who I work with and for, because I would hope that people who are in marketing like the types of challenges that they solve for. And so that's the game you're playing, 8 to whatever hours a day, that I could enjoy that, and yeah, and find a way to enjoy that, um, and make good elsewhere, so to speak.
Yeah. That's a really interesting perspective. And it also made me think so, like, so much has gone on. You seem like a progressively minded person, and I am as well. So much has gone on in the past year
Mm-hmm.
that has caused me to question, like, what kind of organization do I want to work at? Do I want to work at an organization that is more open about talking about the issues that affect the people that are in my life?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I fine to work at an organization that stays relatively silent, for whatever reason that is? And do you have the same kind of concerns? So you're still in a social good space, but are you looking to leadership to be making big announcements about what they believe in, and not just personal mission, but like how they think people should be treated on like we're talking political conversations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. I've been, I want to say the word is fortunate, but in all the roles that I've had at the companies that I've been at, there's been a lot of exposure to political discourse to progressive themes and ideas. Many of them like tackling them head on, being alongside or part of conversations that asked for accountability, spoke to DEI. And then there's all this other stuff around companies that are, you know, that were neutral in nature and then moved into like, oh, that's politically suspect. Um, and so, well, one, I'll say the role that I'm currently in, from a DEI progressive perspective, it's like without expecting it, to be honest. It's been really awesome and great, and all the people who work there and including HR doing like a great job of maintaining that. So super grateful for that. And like I feel like there's an open discourse, and if things need to be addressed, then they could be. So I feel really good about that, and I do want that level of like psychological safety, to not feel icky on another level. So it's like there's like, social good, and then there's for profit, and then there's like for profit sketchy, icky, like what, like if I looked behind these doors would I be concerned, kind of thing. So I would say, again, for my own sanity of like what I want to also juggle constantly in my mind, and like if you're a progressively minded person, um it's really like, as well as anyone, that like the mental strain of carrying the mental energy and mental load of all the problems that exist. Thank you, internet, for opening my eyes and enlightening me and keeping me woke, et cetera, et cetera. But then I was like, why am I so just drained by it also? So, um, just like all the stuff that we learn about boundaries from Brene Brown and all that good stuff, like I think part of my answer to this is the boundaries around what I can keep a mental load around for progressive themes and topics, and how I want to engage with them, and when and how often. Um, I determine my own personal relationship with that. Like I'm happy to operate at a, if you know, positive, like in between, like neutral to positive, where I feel like, okay, there's nothing inherently like not progressive. I don't feel like if we needed progress, like I definitely want to feel like the company is a safe space for all people, and that it feels like that, and people are communicating that openly, and it's not just like, oh yeah, like of course it's safe. If anyone wanted to be, having conversations about it, we could. I don't want it to be um, going unsaid, but I also don't need my company necessarily to be like super engaging in every like political um, topic that they could be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I've landed on kind of a similar thing. I was having like a real crisis last year. I feel like just
I
trying, because
appreciate that.
I'm a social media manager too. So it's like, how much do I engage with these things on my own personal page? And then as a brand page, how much do I push us forward to talk about some social issues, or like, there's Women's History Month, there's Black History Month, and how much do we talk about these things in a way that's authentic and moves the needle, not in a way that's just like, look at us.
Mm-hmm.
And that is always kind of a question that's in the back of my mind. So yeah, I was just wondering if you had kind of the same thought, because I do think as marketers, we have a responsibility to look at those larger conversations and understand how they fit in to marketing. But then it does, again, like we talk about ickiness a lot on this episode, where like it kind of feels icky to like put a marketing lens on these things that affect people's lives and livelihood and who they are.
Yeah, it's it's really tough, um, as a social media manager, like in your role specifically. I feel like it's a really tough gig to have that Venn diagram of what you're talking about, and world, happenings also be something that you now have to parse and process. Um, I don't directly have to deal with that, so my heart goes out to you for sure. Um, yeah, I think it's, I don't know if there's a right answer. There's a lot of ways to screw it up, though. So I get why people will be really sensitive to engaging in that. And kind of, I think about it from like on one hand, you have a responsibility, especially if you're a bigger organization. On the other hand, if I was an individual, I would try to be now with more knowledge about like how to engage with topics that I'd be like, I don't think I'm going to comment on that because like I don't know. And so I get that it's important, but like I'll leave that for someone else and maybe stay educated, etc. And I'd like to think I'd want to give kind of a similar level of, I guess, leeway or the way that I approach it to companies. I think the Bo Burnham's Inside. I don't know if you've seen it. His comedy special does like satire on random companies and brands, like jumping in on political topics. And I feel like it could go that direction. So folks just need to know themselves and then also engage with their audience, because a lot of the times, like your audience, your customers will have opinions, and if they are your true customers, then you got to really make a hard decision to like align with them. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, it's really interesting how sometimes brands like they maybe are well-intentioned attempts to be more aware, and then they end up looking like SNL parodies, and we're like, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
And then it is really like it's hard to both hold space for brands to experiment and understand that there's a person behind that, and then also it's like you said, there's so much opportunity to mess it up. There's so much opportunity to mess it up, so it keeps a lot of people from wanting to take that jump and like take a stand.
Yeah, and I don't know, I feel like we're in this weird space that I don't know, maybe I've heard it, I don't want to say that like, yeah, but like it's like a post woke kind of era right now. Not that we don't need to be woke, but that like there's been a number of years and millions of conversations that have been in the media, in like our public eye, around issues in a way that like pre woke era that we didn't have. And so like with the media and like Gen Z media and programming and what's on Netflix and things like that. So like now that we have an understanding of like I want to say it's giving it, so it's not even just that everyone should now engage with a lot more political topics because they know about them, but that hopefully more people understand that there are more issues in general, and also like what's good, what's bad. Like we've seen however many people get torn up in the media or crucified or what have you, and we're like, oh, okay, now the general public's like, shouldn't do that, like, you know what I mean? And I'm thinking now that, and hopefully I'm not saying the wrong thing, could happen, that because of that, I'm like, okay, engaging with either people or companies or brands or what have you, and be like, better, like we should all have a baseline now, a better baseline of what's good and what's bad. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt, and hopefully you don't come out in the news, kind of thing.
Yeah, I had that same word in my mind where it's like, you're right, our baseline has changed. So the where our knowledge starts should be different. And we do kind of have to give people the benefit of the doubt and the opportunity to make mistakes and then learn from it, which is like really stupid scary. But
Mm-hmm.
we're kind of at that point where there's so much information out there that if you didn't learn it, there's the opportunity for you to learn it, and we have to let people do that.
Yeah, it's hard, but I don't know a better way. That's how we should treat children, I think. I have a kid, so I hope that's right.
Yeah. And aren't we all basically children at heart?
Couldn't have said it better myself ever.
A total 180, but let's go back to the imposter syndrome that you talked about, especially like being a first marketer at a startup where you feel like you have to know absolutely everything. Um, and then there's like always this concept of people in their minds, they think they know what a marketer does, but marketing, like the definition, is so varied that people are like, oh, you absolutely need to know this about demand gen, or you need to know this about social. There's really nothing that you need to know in my mind, but
Mm.
like, how do you approach that? So the idea that you kind of have to be every marketer for everything, where do you find confidence?
Confidence?
Uh, where do you fight imposter syndrome?
Okay. Um, I feel like I have like a baseline of perspectives on work that I've done, and I think a lot of that um, was born of like time and agency, where it kind of had to be really systematized. So knowing that I've executed in that way regularly and kind of brought that forward. So systems. Uh, Simultaneously, I will try to update those systems while I'm using them. And then that, I would say, like spreads my bandwidth and mental so thin, because I'm trying to not just build the plane while I fly it, but like upgrade the plane while I fly it to a better plane. Um, so on one hand, I'm like, I'm pretty sure the problem we're talking about, I can do it. And then like when I get into it, I'm tinkering more than I'd like to, and then it puts me in a place where I'm like I feel like I wanted to just get it done, but also I don't know if I'd be happy with the just get it done version. Um, this isn't answering your question, but this is why I probably haven't gotten through fully the imposter syndrome thing.
I'm someone too who I will get really in the weeds in planning so much that I want it to be perfect, and then I just kind of put off kind of doing the thing. It's a little different from your experience, but it will, and then it like prolongs the stress of what
Mm-hmm.
I should
Yeah.
have been doing. So probably what I should have been doing is just doing the thing, right? Like the just ship it mentality, and
Mm-hmm.
then figuring it out as I go along. So scary. It's so scary to do that.
Yeah. It's too real. But I feel like it's right though. Sorry, not the just ship it. Like I feel like it's right. It might not be right, but I feel like it's helpful to me when I do it, um, because I don't want to say that I'm a perfectionist, even though I am, but I know that I find it hard. Maybe this is just a fault, and I'm defending it, but I find it difficult to not try to do the better thing. And I think maybe that's kind of that's that makes sense coming from like a progressive background where you're like, let's try to do the right thing, everyone, even though it's like so taxing. Um, so, but I feel like because of that, it's I make a lot of analogies to like going to the gym, but like you have to not like you can't like I guess plateau, so you have to like do different exercises or what have you in order to just engage yourself differently. And maybe we're just getting bored, and then that's why we tinker or what have you. But if you end up learning what works and what doesn't work, I feel like that's part of the process where I'm like, okay, I will push myself that way. It might be crappy and I do prolong the stress, but I did it, and now I know how, if I hate it, or if I'm like, okay, that wasn't that bad, and like maybe I'll do it again. And there's only one way to, I think, get there and find out it, and it's through the exposure of doing it.
Yeah, I agree. I'm also definitely a very systems minded person, and I will reach a point like almost every 3 months where I will go back to my system and I'm like, that's not good enough. Fix
Mm,
it. Right. And then I'll try to make a change. And then, like you said, bad, bad or good. Like, and then it improved. And it's kind of almost going back to that growth zone where like we put ourselves in these uncomfortable positions where we made our job a little bit harder to either get better or learn something that we didn't know before.
Yeah, I don't know if it's right, but I think through trial and error, if enough things go wrong, I'll be like, I should probably stop. But we haven't gotten there yet, Amber. So that's good.
Yes, we are still going. Um, Knowing that you rely a lot on systems is really interesting because you had mentioned to me before that you are kind of passionate about like habit building right now and figuring out how to build healthy habits, get rid of unhealthy habits. And they seem like they kind of go in parallel, like building systems for yourself, building systems for work. What do
Mm-hmm.
you have to say about that?
Yeah, you're right. I'm okay at both, is what I would say. Um, I really like. I know that it's necessary for success in both sides. Um, I'd like to think that even like the most productive people aren't incredible at their systems. I think the challenge right now with a lot of change, either at work or in life, that it becomes difficult more often than not. The systems that I start up building are probably more either prescriptive or more specific. And so they're evolving because I'm like, oh yeah, it's zero sustainable at all. Um, and then I find that out on both sides of the coin. Um, and then like I was saying earlier, I'm like, oh okay. At the beginning of the year, I did like 7 habit switches and like stopped certain things. Um, I don't think that's recommended because you're like juggling constantly. I just saying it out loud, you're like, yeah, it doesn't sound like a thing that you want to do for work either, to like juggle constantly. So I guess what I will say is, one, it's I've had to like give myself a lot of grace with dropping a lot of balls, and then going back to like thinking about the long term of it. Like I didn't fail now, I just like failed a little bit in the grand scheme of things, so it's fine. Keep going to that, because getting down on yourself will also use energy in like a really crappy way. And then yeah, I don't know if I have any other advice other than I'm just like trying to force it. But I think the things that really matter to me will keep coming back up. um, and I'm just trying to do my best. And then I would say like journaling is super super important with that. Again, whichever way. Um, a lot of the habits, like I'm like, I really want to skip this, and like all good habits, it's just a thing you just keep doing. And I think ultimately, talking through this and figuring it out with you, Amber, the real habit is doing stuff even when I don't want to. And I think that applies to like all the habits. So ta-da.
Well, that's perfect because I was going to ask you if, like, if you could give a piece of advice to, like, 3 years ago Joe, who's trying to care about his mental health as well as grow in a career, what would that be? And that's not your piece of advice, but it's a good segue.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Even though I think about like as a LinkedIn poster, a regular poster, it's like just post for you a couple years ago. Um, I would say, yeah, probably to think long term, like think about what you want in the future. Super difficult, and like I think like smarter people than me who I looked up to told me to do this when I was younger, and it just didn't make sense to me, or I didn't understand the value of it. But um, one thing that that's like analogous to that is just compound interest. And so whatever dreams you have for yourself, young Joe, um, whatever you want to do or become, if you want to be any different than you are now, um, start now, or think about it in a long-term time frame, um, because you'd be surprised like what you're capable of over time.
Yeah, that's huge. I think that any one of us, like, if we were to look back even just a year and see the small steps that we took to grow, like professional development, personal development, that we held on to, the compounding nature of it is incredible.
Mm-hmm. Agree.
Yeah. I don't know if I prepared you for this. I'm going to wrap up with 2 more questions, but one
Go
of
for it.
them is, can you share a joke with me?
Yeah. I feel like I came prepared, but this isn't my joke. Is that
Okay, that's fine.
fine?
Yes.
I just enjoyed it. Um, a Buddhist monk walks up to a hot dog vendor and says, "Make me one with everything." After a brief chuckle, the vendor makes the hot dog and gives it to the monk, saying, "That'll be $4, please." After the monk hands over a $10 bill, he finds himself waiting uncomfortably while the vendor does nothing except stare back at him. Awkwardly, the monk asks, "What about my change?" "Ah," replies the hot dog vendor, "change must come from within." Yeah,
Sassy little hot dog vendor.
yeah. I mean, when you're serving hot dogs to monks, you got to be.
Are you a big joke person?
Uh, that's funny. That's a funny question. Um, I, if it was up to me, I would only speak in jokes.
Yes.
I like generally make fun of anything and very sarcastic. If anyone like looks at my LinkedIn posts of the past, they're all jokes. Generally, they're like I'm barely applying anything to the conversation. I'm just posting memes. I do that work and I do that on LinkedIn.
I think that it's like that's kind of how I process information too, is like I almost think in memes sometimes, or like things that make me laugh or recall like the way that someone said something in a sitcom, and I'm like, that would be really funny in this situation. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just, for me, that's just kind of how I process the world. It sounds like you kind of have a similar point of view.
Yeah, for better or for worse, I'm like so here for the fact that that became normalized. Like one positive outcome of COVID, then like everyone was on Teams and Slack and what have you, and like I 70% of my language could be in meme or GIF, and like in an all hands with thousands of people, and it would be received normally. I'm like, that's not bad.
Yeah, finally feel seen and heard.
Yeah, seriously. And I post that in
um,
GIF format.
yes, I finally feel seen and heard. Um, to wrap up, let's say I'm giving you a soapbox for the last 60 seconds. I want you to talk about whatever you want to talk about, whether it's personal, professional. Go.
Ooh, don't know if I was prepared for this. Um,
I didn't prepare you.
Perfect. Shoot. I don't know, what do people need to know? Um, Definitely, yeah, I think I want to like go back to the long term perspective that I'm trying to cultivate. So this might be a soapbox for me, but if you're anywhere in your journey right now, in particular, if it sucks or if it feels hard, um, that's where I go. Like, that's okay. This is the beginning. You and I have started so many things that took a while. I don't know, like school, like growing up, like finding your visual identity. My closet still needs work, but it's okay. It'll be a while. I'm going to enjoy what I'm doing, or try to enjoy the clothes that I have right now. um, and it won't last forever, whatever the crap is. And that's another reason why, you know, see if you can find a way to appreciate something. You know, might not be the crap, but something else around the crap in your life, because that also won't last forever. Um, Not trying to be like morbid, but yeah,
You're being realistic.
yeah, trying to.
Yeah. Well, Joe, it has been so great to have you on the podcast. I'd never actually spoken to you before, so this being our first conversation is really interesting,
Yeah,
really illuminating. I'm
I'm
going to
here.
put your information in the show notes, and if there's anything else you want me to include, I'll include that as well.
So
But thank you so much for joining me.
yeah, thank you, Amber. It was a pleasure.